NAN talk, Introduction to Sensory Design. Neurodiversity, the term defined by Judy Singer. Then a couple of words on what the difference is between neurodivergent, neurotypical, and neurodiverse. Neurodivergent refers to people who are wired differently, for example, people on the autism spectrum. Or, as I like to put it, people who have a divergent experience of the mind. Neurotypical, on the other hand, refers to someone who does not present a divergent mind. And neurodiverse refers to a group that are both neurodivergent and neurotypical minds. So, a couple of more general definitions. When we look at neurodiversity, there tends to be two models that we are predisposed to. One is the medical model of disability. And according to the Nottinghamshire website, the medical model of disability defines people who to be disabled by their impairments and differences. Now, this is contrasting with the social model of disability, which defines disability and says that disability is actually caused by the way society is organized. Within this, we have another two definitions that are very important. One is hypersensitivity, which is that within the invisible disability spectrum, it leads to abstraction from stimulus from the environment. And this is very closely related to the social model of disability because we externalize disability and we say it's the environment that's not adapted to my disability or to myself. Therefore, if I'm hypersensitive, I'm too sensitive to the stimulus and I seek abstraction from stimulus. If I'm hyposensitive, that means to attraction to stimulus. So these are your fidgeters, the people looking for stimulus by touching and things like this from the environment. Now, the profiles are not always the same and attached to the person throughout their day, throughout their lifetime. They vary across time and they vary across the senses. So, what are the senses? This is an image from the housing paper by NDTI on housing autistics. So, these are the senses that are listed in that paper, and it's a really useful paper. If you want, I can send it to you later. There's touch, smell, taste, sound, sight, interoception, which is knowing our internal state, including feelings, temperature, pain, hunger, and thirst, and proprioception, which is the awareness of position and movement of the body, as well as vestibular, which is the coordination of movement with balance. Now, sensory profile. Some people tend to say everyone is a little bit autistic or everyone is a little bit hypersensitive. That's true. Everyone is a little bit hypersensitive. However, there are people who experience extreme cases of hypersensitivity and hyposensitivity. And this is what we tend to call the spiky profilers. And sometimes this happens with one or two senses or even more. And they can trigger also differences in communication and social interaction that can often lead to misunderstandings and eventually meltdowns. Now, the whole social experience and socializing is also a sensory experience in itself. But we won't be touching too much on that part. We will be focusing mostly on the senses and sensory inputs. Now, what sensory profile should we design for? Hyposensitivity, hypersensitivity, or both? The answer for architects is really hypersensitivity because we design for bigger scale environments. Hyposensitivity, on the other hand, can always find stimulation through fidgeters and move towards stimuli. So, hyposensitive profiles can't find that stimulation. Therefore, we tend to design for the abstraction of stimulation from the environment. So, for example, the need to provide quiet space. For hypersensitivity, it is hard to find an environment absent of stimulation, and it can be expensive. For example, flotation tanks. This is why green spaces, parks, and quiet areas are important. They embrace hypersensitivity, and you'll see in some of my examples what I mean. However, you can also design for hyposensitivity, but it's not the main priority at the moment because Normally, the hyposensitives, they search for stimulus and they can find it in their environment or with certain fidgeters or other elements, such as furniture. So this is a spectrum that I've designed. It's the design spectrum from body to environment. So you have on the one hand your hyposensitives, which use a lot of fidgeting. So, for example, fidget jewelry, this is the design spectrum of everything, and it puts everything into a different lens. So you're not just, when you're looking through the neurodiversity lens and through the profiles for hyper and hypersensitive, things can blend together into a spectrum. Now, on one hand, you have built environments, accessible environments, for example, through lighting. And this image here shows the first building built according to the PAS 6463, which is standard for neurodiversity. And then on the other hand, I chose my own fidget ring, which I'm wearing today. And it's a fidget ring, it's a fidget jewelry, so it's for the hypo type of profile. It's for when I need to fidget. Now, there's also kinetic furniture. And this is an example of a furniture that creates pressure around the body. So it's also not just pressure, but for example, you can search for stimulus, so you can turn in your chair. That's another type of furniture that is kinetic and is stimulus searching. So the furniture can vary between hypo and hyper. But at the end of the spectrum on the right, you have buildings, and these normally tend to be designed for hypersensitive profiles. But that doesn't mean you can't include elements that introduce movement and that introduce a sort of more fidgeting interaction and steaming interactions. Now, a little example of a fidget jewelry was this ring. This is a puppet ring. So it's a sort of design that we developed. Um, and it's a ring that allows you to pop between your hands. So it has a little popper attached to it. It was 3D printed at London Fields Design School. And it's really a product that can help you fidget throughout the day in a discreet way. You can choose different colors. So there's all these elements to adulthood as well, to the product design. And this was the original design made in Rhino. It was also thought of as something that could be injection molded altogether. So it's a ring that allows you to pop it against your hand like this. And it creates a suction. It has a little suction cup that can make popping noises, but very discreetly and not too loud. Now, this is a furniture piece. It's a case study. It's called The Quiet Hour by Alex, who's in this call. And it integrates a combination of color and lighting, textures, but also furniture. So the textures within that furniture allow you to feel different experiences and different types of touches. So it's a sort of stimulant furniture that helps you soothe. And this is someone interacting with that furniture during our launch event last year. Now, the final case study that I have is the RNIB building, the Grimaldi building, close to King's Cross. So the entrance to this building, by the way, this was the first building to be built together with the PAS 6463, which has the standards, and it's divided according to the hypo and hyper conundrum and profiles. And they have really useful tables at the end of the PAS, which basically describe what characteristics of the environment or furniture, materials, and finishes you could include to design for either hyposensitive or hypersensitive profiling. But this is my personal take on the building. So the entrance to the building from the side of a pedestrian access with the garden on the side, creating a buffer for noise. So this is the most important feature that I found, is that the location of the building is uh was chosen in such a way where you have two green spaces on either side of the building and one at the back. This creates buffer for the noisy roads. So it's crucial to consider noise, because some people are extremely sensitive to noise. You might have noise canceling headphones, but some people don't like to wear headphones. So This green space is accessible to the building users and also gives the space for recollection and to walk around during breaks. So if you're having a trigger, a meltdown, a panic attack, you don't feel safe in the building that you're in your working environment, perhaps because you have your colleagues there, you're being watched in some way or another, you can walk around, you can pace yourself in the green spaces. So access to green space is the most important thing that I've seen in this building, and the location of the building. Then you can see that it's extremely well daylit. The spaces have a view of green spaces outside. The glazing is also a feature that provides additional buffer to road noise, which is extremely important. The views outside of green areas from office spaces and impeccable daylight control through the semi-dark and transparent blinds, which I'll show next, that are installed. So you have a lot of blinds, some of which are semi-darkened and semi-transparent, and these are quite nice to control the daylighting levels. And you still have a beautiful view of the outside green space areas, which is quite nice. And then you have the blackout blinds and lighting controls. So these lighting controls are really special. They have 4 types of lighting with 4 different levels each. And they go from warm colors to cold colors because they found out that people prefer warm colors, but some people prefer cold colors. This is also because the RNIB building was designed for blind and partly sighted people. So it's also a combination of invisible disabilities. It's a building that is so nicely designed. It's got so many constraints to it that it came up with a really exceptional design for lighting. So this is again a column with a signaling strip of blue, a blue strip that signals the column so you don't confuse it with the background. And this is crucial for partly sighted people. And as well as the top day lit room. This was the meeting room where we began our visit. And also you have the controls. You can see the 4 buttons for the different types of colors and the up and down, which turn the color intensity more or less. And they have 4 levels in themselves. Now, this space was actually also uh, delimited by noise canceling glass. So they added a layer of glass. They had the balustrade, which you can see at the back here. First, they added the balustrade, but as obviously the building is being occupied, the building continues to evolve. So they've added this layer of glass, which turns the space quite quiet and ideal for meetings. And at the same time, it's in the center of the building. Another thing that I found interesting were these elements, these 3D printed elements that indicate the number of steps or how far one has gone from one step to the next step. So they're indents, they have a sense of touch that appeal to your sense of touch. And by touching, you can tell which step you're on and how far away you are from a platform. And the one on the left was from a ramp as well. And this is not just for partly sighted people or blind people to understand their surroundings. It's also a sort of feature of playfulness and touching and stimulus that you can get from. So the scale is small because it's a fidgeting or hyposensitive element. So that was my main understanding of the whole hypersensitive and hyposensitive. Then you also have, again, furniture, which has contrasting as a texture to it. So you see this table has texture, it has indentations, and the chairs that are presented also have different textures. I'll show you a picture in a minute with all the different types of seating that they have inside the building. But what I want to bring to your attention is the contrasting textures on the floor. However, the color remained the same. And this was a specific feature that they didn't have contrasting colors in. They kept the color the same. Maybe I can show it better on this picture. Yes. So you see it's still gray, but it's just different textures and anti-sliding and texturized for um, guidance. However, if it was on a different building that wasn't designed for neurodiversity, this would have contrasting colors. But because they want to tone it down, they chose to use the same color but different textures, which is quite interesting. And also, you can see all the different spaces, all the different seating areas, which allow you to choose the form of seating that you want to choose. You can pick a table that is smooth, you can pick a table that is textured, like that one. So, all these things play a big role in how you allow people to behave and to be themselves, whether they're in a stimming mode, whether they're in a they need a space of quietness and restoration. And I think that's it for today's session. And I just want to bring you back for to this diagram and really think about, it goes from a hyposensitive to a hypersensitive, and then the scale at which we design things will have a direct impact on your type of profile, your type of sensory profile, and how that differs throughout the day. So basically, what we're doing is just starting to come up with a way to design and co-inhabitate spaces. Now, when it gets interesting is when someone who's very highly sensitive to a certain sense, hypersensitive, comes together or is together in the same space with someone who's hyposensitive to that same sense. Now, this is where it becomes really difficult. And I had a chat with someone last time we had a talk, and it was really interesting because when it comes to that stage, you have to nurture compassion and you have to nurture mutual respect. And that is almost like something that goes beyond architecture and design, really.